Idaho Matters is one way to learn about the people, the places, and the things that make Idaho unique. From the geography, the flora and the fauna, to the culture and arts of this place that we call home. Subscribe and listen to Idaho Matters today at boisestatepublicradio.org/podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Cadet. More Idaho Matters right now. Before we do start this next segment, we want to let you know that we'll be talking about domestic violence and sexual assault. So some of you may want to not listen. Some of you may want to take a pause, maybe listen another time. But we do want you to know that this is a very sensitive topic. So wanted to give you a heads up on that. So with that said, when police respond to a 911 call for domestic violence, they may find someone who maybe has been slapped or punched or kicked by their partner, and officers and doctors can see clear physical evidence of that assault. However, there is one form of violence that's actually really hard to spot and it's hard to prove, and this might be really surprising. And it's often a precursor to domestic homicide. We're talking about choking or strangling someone because it often leaves little visible evidence. And if officials aren't trained to look for those signs, the victim may end up back at the mercy of their abuser. And here's what research shows. Someone who survives being strangled once is 750% more likely to be killed by that same person. So this is why the city of Nampa is trying to change that statistic. And recently they held a training for police officers and doctors and prosecutors and survivors so that they can try and stop this cycle of violence. So joining us now to talk more about this is Jeannie Strohmeyer. She is the executive director of the Nampa Family Justice Center. Jeannie, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here.
So Jeannie, I know this is a really difficult topic, but I think it's an important topic to talk about. And I do want to start just about strangulation because that is a staggering statistic. You took this training. Why in that training did they say this often leaves behind little visible evidence? I think that's surprising.
Yeah, it is actually. And what I would like to say also is we brought this training in. It's a national training, high level training for 2 full days. So there was jam packed with amazing information that really brought some light to matters that we weren't aware of. And the education was phenomenal. So what we learned in this training is that 50% of the time when people have been strangled, there is no evidence on the outside, but they have also done autopsies of people that have passed away when there's no evidence of strangulation on the outside, and they could see it on the inside when they have done the autopsy. You see the petechiae, and which is the red dots. The blood vessels have exploded. And so that happens frequently on the outside, 50% of the time, but often doesn't. And so it is something that we have learned and have to be very intentionally aware of when we are talking to our victims and listening to our victims.
So Jeannie, I know in the training, the trainers went over what kinds of questions that police and doctors and nurses should be asking. Can we go over some of those? Because I know one is, ask the person, did you lose consciousness?
Yes, absolutely. So there are multiple types of questions that they're going to be asking them. They're going to ask them maybe at the time if they had raspy voice or hoarse voice or coughing, unable to speak. So there's some things that maybe they've been strangled and maybe they come in maybe not right away, but sometimes people don't report until a day or two later. So they might ask some of these questions that might not be so evident at the time when they're interviewing. Swallowing changes, trouble swallowing, painful to swallow, neck pain, nauseous, vomiting, drooling, breathing changes, behavioral changes, memory loss. So some of these questions, headaches, dizziness, involuntary urination or defecation. So these are some of the questions that would be asked from the maybe law enforcement when they're interviewing the individual.
Well, one that stood out to me as well, Jeannie, is asking the victim to take off like any makeup or anything like that so that they can take pictures?
Yes, absolutely. Because they're going to want to look behind the ears, under the chin. They're going to want to look at the neck. They want to look around at the surrounding areas on their eyes just to make sure that they have looked in all the places to see if they can identify any evidence of strangulation, and specifically the petechiae, and the little dots of blood vessels that have exploded. And so that would show, and that's where the pictures would be really important. And that's where the makeup, taking that makeup off and being very vigilant about all those particular areas.
So, Jeannie, during the training, what did the trainers say about why these signs are missed sometimes, or maybe dismissed, and not just by police officers, but even doctors can miss the severity of this sometimes.
Absolutely. And that would be the case for many things that we're dealing with in this particular arena. And that's because oftentimes it's lack of education, lack of information, lack of research. Research. And the reason, again, is because if you think about the work that we're doing, we're working with victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, elder abuse, stalking, human trafficking, all kinds of things, right? That and more law enforcement prosecutors dealing with. And it's very hard if you don't have the training to really know about what's going on, because there's so much variation of information you need to know. And that is specifically why we brought these trainers out, because what we recognize is we were missing pieces. And so by bringing them out, it just kind of caused everybody just to kind of, their mouth dropped and like, wow, we knew some of this information, but we didn't know a lot of this. And so that's why we worked so hard. We started in January and started letting people know we're going to have this training in October, because we knew across our communities that we were lacking the knowledge everywhere, like including the Family Justice Center, right? We as advocates and the work that we're doing here. So we are always looking, how do we do this work better? What are we missing? And that was one of the reasons why we brought the trainers in, is because we cannot know all this stuff unless we have the proper training. And so it was really phenomenal, the response that we got. And I'm so excited for our communities, because this is going to make our communities a safer community for the people that are dealing with these issues.
So, Jeannie, one of the things too, which I thought was interesting, is verbiage, right? And even the wording. So, is saying choking instead of strangulation. And because, I mean, I think sometimes when you say choking, it doesn't seem as, frankly, as violent. It doesn't seem to be as big of an issue as strangulation. So talk to us about that as well, about the type of verbiage that everyone should be using around this.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. So the choking is, when we think of choking, and people used to use choking all the time and still do, but more so in the past, as far as the professionals. And so what we realize is that when you choke, it's going to be something that is an accident, because it's coming from something that gets stuck in your throat and you're choking on it, right? Whereas strangulation is somebody's putting their hands around a person's neck, or it could be done in multiple ways, right? So it could be done through hands, it could be done through a ligature, it could be done through the forearm, in all kinds of ways, because what that's doing is cutting off the airflow and the blood flow. And so strangulation is somebody taking somebody's life in their hands, whereas choking it's an accident. You choke on food. It's something internal that you're trying to get out, where strangulation is external.
So, Jeannie, I mentioned in the introduction that that experts say that someone who is strangled by their partner just one time is 750% more likely to be killed by that abuser. So, with that said, it seems that a training like this gives you, it makes you better informed, right? You, as in your center prosecutors, doctors, police officers, so that everyone is understanding the severity of this issue. I am curious, though, why this has sometimes been treated differently than other forms of domestic violence. Like, let's say something that is much more visible, right? A black eye, a broken limb.
Yes, because strangulation actually can take somebody's life in a matter of minutes. It renders people unconscious in a matter of seconds, and it takes their life in a matter of minutes. So the other types of abuse are severe and unacceptable and traumatic, but strangulation takes people's lives in ways that the other ones is going to take a whole lot more effort and energy to do so. So it's something we really have to zero in on and be very, very attentive to those signs. And I would suggest also that we trained our professionals, and that's what the focus was, our professional training, because we as professionals need to understand the severity of it, need to understand the life and death situation. We recognize that the strangler is holding the life and breath of the victim in their hands, and the victim is aware that that's what that abuser is saying to them. I can take your life right now if I choose to. And so it is a really concerning situation. So we are aware of that. But what I would also say is that when people, we need to let our victims know that this is something. So oftentimes we would think that they would know that, right? Because they're the victim being subjected to this. But what we know is in domestic violence, victims minimize the severity of the situation. And so they often, in these situations, as you mentioned, one time is 750 times more likely the person's life will end. But that victim doesn't realize that. So oftentimes in domestic violence, they are strangled over and over and over and over again. And that's a really significant thing to, not only is this meaning that this person's life can be taken, but also what we know based on this training, which was really great to help us to understand this, is it's killing their brain cells. And those brain cells never come back. It's also doing internal damage that is not seen oftentimes and causes strokes. And it often it causes long-term physical effects that are negative. So there's so much around this that we need to be sharing with the victims. And then they have choice, right? So we don't force victims to do and make decisions, but we give them information. And the more information we have, the more information we share, then they can make an informed decision of how they want to move forward in their life and recognize the severity of what's happening in these situations.
Jeannie, real quick before I let you go, where can victims go for help?
So I would suggest, you can, I would suggest you go to an advocacy center. An advocacy center can start the process, and it also puts the choice in the victim's hands, meaning that, so for here at the Nampa Family Justice Center, they're going to meet with a community-based advocate first. And that advocate is just going to walk them along and beside them and give them information so they can make some choices of what they would like to do, the next steps that they would like to do. We will not force them to do anything. They can choose. So I would suggest an advocacy center. And the Family Justice Center is happy to help and wants to be there for people that are dealing with these really tragic situations and difficult situations. And we're here for you.
Well, Jeannie, I want to thank you so much for your time today to talking about this difficult subject. We've been speaking with Jeannie Strohmeyer. She's the executive director of the Nampa Family Justice Center, talking about how the city of Nampa is trying to stop strangulation in cases of domestic abuse and protect victims from that cycle of violence. We will, of course, put more information on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org. Also, if you are a victim of domestic abuse or you know someone who is, you can call the Nampa Family Justice Center. That number is 208-475-5700. Thanks so much for listening to Idaho Matters. Boise State Public Radio and Idaho Matters are members of the NPR network. It's an independent coalition of public media podcasters. You can find more shows in the network wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Gemma Gaudette. We'll see you tomorrow.
No matter what happens in Washington, the NPR Politics Podcast is here for you. For the latest news, insights, and analysis from the election and beyond, listen to the NPR Politics Podcast. No matter what happens in Washington, the NPR Politics Podcast is here for you. For the latest news, insights, and analysis from the election and beyond, listen to the NPR Politics Podcast.